When you first watched Squid Game, it felt like this terrifying glimpse into some dark dystopian future, right? But what if the real horror isn't what's to come, but what's already happened? What if it's really just a mirror to our own history?
I mean, we all binged it, and we all probably thought, wow, this is intense, it's brilliant. But it's just a story, a crazy fantasy cooked up to give us a thrill while we're sitting safely on our couches. But here's where it gets a little weird. What if I told you that these kinds of games weren't just made up for TV? What if they were real? I mean, really real. And for centuries, people have been watching them. Okay, let's get into it. Because Squid Game is so much more than just a hit show, it's a mirror. A pretty uncomfortable one, actually. It reflects some of the most brutal parts of our past and shows us just how far people will go when everything is on the line. Think about the game itself, the actual Squid Game. It's based on a real kids' game from Korea, and the premise is dead simple. You have boundaries, you have a goal, and you have one basic rule: stay inside the lines or you're out. Simple as that? Well, throughout history, that same simple rule had much, much higher stakes. Stepping outside the line wasn't about losing a game, it was about breaking society's rules. And the consequence wasn't just sitting on the sidelines. It was being cast out, punished, or even killed. And this idea, it leads us directly to a huge historical parallel. See, way before those masked VIPs were watching from their fancy lounge, people were turning survival into mass entertainment in places like the Roman Colosseum. Just look at the comparison side by side. It's kind of chilling. You have the Squid Game contestant crushed by debt, and on the other side, a Roman gladiator who was usually a slave, a prisoner, or just desperately poor. Both are forced to fight for a crowd. Both are, if you want to get technical, volunteers. And for both, death is the main event. It's a spectacle. Yeah, the parallels are pretty hard to ignore. The setting is different, sure, but the fundamental dynamic, it's exactly the same. The desperate fighting for the amusement of the powerful. But here's the thing. The players are only half of the equation. The real horror of these games, it isn't just about who's playing, it's about who's watching. And this is where the story takes an even darker turn. So, let me ask you, when you think back on the show, what was the absolute most disturbing part for you? Was it the violence? The betrayals between people who were supposed to be friends? For a lot of people, the most horrifying part isn't the violence itself. It's the audience. It's those wealthy, anonymous people in masks watching human beings suffer and die, purely for entertainment. And believe it or not, that's not fiction. In medieval Europe, public executions were basically big community events, like families would attend, people sold food. It was a day out. Death was literally a form of entertainment. So, whether you're watching from a fancy suite wearing a golden mask or from a crowded town square hundreds of years ago, that instinct to watch suffering as a spectacle, well, it's been with us for a very, very long time. Now let's talk about the idea of choice. It's a really key part of the show's plot, right? The players actually vote to go back into the games. They choose to be there. But what does that choice even mean? Sure, they sign a contract. They agree to the terms. But is it really a choice when the only other option is a life of absolute misery and crushing debt? I mean, when you have two doors, and one is certain ruin, and the other is a tiny chance at survival, picking one of them doesn't exactly feel like free will, does it? And history is just filled with these kinds of so-called choices. Poor people joining armies and going to war for a paycheck. People taking incredibly dangerous jobs in mines or factories because it was the only work they could get. Desperation has always been the thing that pushes people into situations they'd never otherwise agree to. So when you start to put all these pieces together, the history of these games, the spectacle of it all, this illusion of choice, that's when you get to the real horror of Squid Game. And the absolute genius of the show is using children's games to tell this story. Kids' games are supposed to teach us how to survive, strategy, strength, following the rules. But they always have a safety net. If you lose, you get up and play again. All Squid Game does is remove the net. And that gets us to the ultimate horror, which is normalization. It's how quickly this all becomes normal. When death is just another rule in the game, people adapt with terrifying speed. And if history shows us anything, it's that human beings can get used to almost anything, even watching other people die for sport. So in the end, Squid Game isn't really a warning about some distant future. It's a reflection of a past that maybe we never really left behind. The systems of power, desperation, and spectacle, they're all still here, just in different forms. Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. The games change, the masks change, but have we? Has our fundamental human nature, as both the players and the spectators, really changed at all?